challenging audience. It always expands our reach and very attractive to have the people who are viewing us across the globe. The issue before us today is to address trauma in many different facets. I don't want to get ahead of how we're going to speak to that today. But let us say that we're very much concerned about how the representation or intersection between trauma and the unhoused and other types of concerns that may cause trauma. And we're particularly interested today in the city of Oakland, but we believe that what we're doing is representation, a model perhaps that other cities across the country can adapt and use. What is happening in Oakland is not just an existential threat to Oakland. It is pervasive in nearly every city I have been in this country. And so we see that dramatic pattern. So we're hoping what we're doing will eventually be used by people in other spaces. I'm going to try to end there. We have several people that need to speak to us today. But first, I would like to ask Dr. Jim Hopkins, who is the senior pastor of this esteemed and historic church. He's going to come and greet us. Let's greet him with a hand of applause.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Dr. Evans. And I don't know if some of you, but this might be your first time at Lakeshore Avenue Baptist Church. We've been doing work in the community since 1860, making us one of Oakland's most enduring institutions. And a good number of those years, one of our significant partnerships have been with what is now Berkeley School of Theology. In fact, the first president of what was then, whatever the name was then, we've all name changed, was Dr. Claiborne Hill. And Dr. Claiborne Hill assumed the presidency from being pastor of this congregation. So there's a long-standing connection of seeking the peace of our city in the words of the prophet Jeremiah. So it's really good to welcome everyone today. A couple of notes. I want to thank Jerry Wolf up there for running the sound and the live stream. Paige Bentz for the decorations. Ashley and Carol Ash way in the back for setting up the refreshments. Will Ash, Kappa Alpha Psi, provided the refreshments in honor of his sisters in the Deltas. So anyway, my colleague, Pastor Carolyn Matthews, is here. Just really, really good to welcome everyone. A couple of invitations were extended to political leaders. I think somebody from Nikki Fortunato Bass's office will be here. She's our local council person. It's campaign season. She's running for the Alameda County Supervisor, so she's out knocking on doors this morning. And also I hope we'll have at least a representative from Mayor Sheng Tao's office dropping through this part of the morning. But anyway, Dr. Evans, Dr. Flesher, Dr. Brenneman, others from Berkeley School of Theology, members of the community. We seek the peace of our community, and our community is in pain. Let's talk about that.
Let's give a hand of applause to our senior pastor. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Carmen Ward-Sullivan. She's going to lead us through, and there are perhaps other introductions you may want to make as we prepare for our keynote speaker. Thank you for making mention of the Berkeley School of Theology, but we also have some Berkeley School of Theology advisory board committee persons here. Dr. Hopkins, would you stand? Are there others here on the advisory committee? Okay, well, you represent everyone else, and we thank you for that. We have heard that Dr. Brenneman, the esteemed president of Berkeley School of Theology, and also he's a professor of Hebrew Bible and we certainly would like for him to stand and be recognized. Doctor? And we may have time for him to share with us before we leave, if you're going to be here for it. And of course, Dr. Leanne Snow-Fletcher has a couple of hats at Berkeley School of Theology. She's not only the Vice President of Academic Affairs at the institution, but she's also the Dean of Faculty, as well as a professor also of Hebrew Bible. And Dr. Fletcher, would you stand for recognition as well? Amen. Thank you. Thank you. I always like to watch Dr. Fletcher and Dr. Brenneman get into Hebrew issues and concerns with Tiktalu, Tiktalai, Tadalgus Forte, and all that kind of stuff. Nobody else knows either what they're talking about, including me. But we're grateful for them being here. Without any further ado, what we do here, I don't do. Let's be honest, I don't do this. I have maybe some aspects of what I think needs to be done, bridging the academy to the community, to the church, et cetera, et cetera. I understand that. But when we start talking about the regular issues and how to address the unhoused, the concerns that we all have, most of us know someone who is unhoused. And if we don't know that person, we know the families, persons who are unhoused. And if we don't know that, we know people who are suffering from some mental deficiencies or inadequacies or abnormalities, etc. And so we're all involved in this communal effort to find out how we can be of service. And so those profound questions are answered by people that you will meet here today. And none less than Dr. Common for his others who come now and guide us through and tell us what we want to do. And by the way, I want to thank my good brother, Kappa Alpha Psi, for making this day special. As I said, tell that big brother, I said, yo.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. And so, before I get started, behind all this work is a committee. So I'd like to have our committee members stand. Dr. Evans, of course, Dr. Alvin McLean, Joshua Johnson, Dr. Sylvia Campbell, Dr. Leanne Fletcher. So we are the workers behind the scenes. And so you'll hear from one of our esteemed committee members today that's prepared an excellent presentation. I also want to acknowledge the Delta Sigma Theta sorority members from both the East Bay Alumni chapter in the house first. So my stores that are here, please stand for both the East Bay Alumni chapter. Thank you. And I'm standing too because I'm a member. And then, of course, we have another Delta in the house, Dr. Sylvia Campbell from Cambridge Tri-City Alumni chapter. Thank you. So I just want to read a couple of words here. So as a member of the East Bay Alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, I can attest to OBBAC's unwavering dedication to the community, especially to initiatives addressing homelessness, housing insecurity, and poverty. Our partnership with the Center of Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice, along with the Berkeley School of Theology, has been invaluable. This collaboration has strengthened our shared commitment to addressing community-based trauma and supporting the healing of vulnerable populations in the city of Oakland. We don't look around the box and see what's the housing issues that are happening today. And then I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the meaningful partnership of my church, Allen Temple Baptist Church, and its visionary leaders, Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, affectionately known as Pastor Jackie, and Reverend J. Alfred Smith Sr., lovingly called Pastor E, who was with us in spirit and support online. These capital series reflect Pastor E's vision for our community to bring healing to both the community and the wounded healers within. And now, and those are his words, he must make sure that the healers, the wounded healers, are good. So now I have the honor of introducing a friend, a church member, board of trustee member, for several years. I'm going to introduce Dr. on pastoral care. Professionally, Dr. McLean is an honorable psychologist. He's the president of the Board of Regents of Samuel Merritt University right here in Oakland, and serves as the dean of John F. Kennedy School of Psychology and Social Sciences, at National University, and one of our esteemed committee members. He does a lot. If I could just have a little bit of your energy, I'll be so happy. So without further ado, Dr. McLean, let's give him a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. And it is indeed a pleasure to be here with you. Before I start, I'm going to make a request, a couple of requests. One is, can everyone move over this slide? Yes. I think you'll be able to see the slides better. And my second request has to do with the fact that I don't do lectures. I have conversations. So to have a conversation, you have to have at least a couple of people talking. So I'm going to set this mic aside, and you will use this mic, because I will be posing some questions to you. And I will use this mic here. Don't want to get them too close to avoid any feedback. So as I pose questions, anyone who is so inclined to respond, please respond. I'm not sure if that can hold that mic. I think that's too thin for that. Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do today is have a conversation focused on trauma. We're going to talk about some core concepts relating to trauma, with a special focus on the unhoused. This is going to be the outline of the activities we're going to engage in. We're going to start off by coming up with a solid definition of what we mean by trauma. Then we will proceed to talk about what is the impact of trauma from a neurobiologic, a psychological, a social, and perhaps a little bit of an epigenetic perspective, okay? Then we're going to focus our energies on specifically trauma within the unhoused community, looking at trauma as it relates to adults, youth, and children. We're going to talk about implications for treatment, including trauma-informed care, and the social, political, and policies that we need to take in consideration as we talk about trauma. Then finally, we're going to have a delightful panel discussion, a little question and answer period, and just enjoy ourselves in this conversation, okay? So, let's start off with, what is trauma? And that is my first question to you. Anyone want to venture a definition? All answers are correct. Anyone? We have many folks. Thank you. Aretha is going to talk.
It is an event or a series of events that all around a person's nervous system and impacts their ability to cope and impact their life.
Excellent. Anyone want to add to that definition? Okay. Aretha's definition is excellent, and we're going to add to that, that is the experience of violence and victimization, including sexual abuse, physical abuse, severe neglect, loss, domestic violence, and or witnessing of violence, terrorism, and disasters. So it's pretty comprehensive. And many of us have experienced some level of trauma. In terms of the different levels at which the potential traumatic events that can cause trauma include under abuse, adverse events of childhood, and we'll talk about ACEs in a moment. Violence, physical and sexual, emotional. Witnessing violence, so you can have vicarious trauma by just experiencing and witnessing it. Bullying, stalking, cyber abuse, all of those occur. And of course, death, abandonment or neglect, war, disaster, the fear of war, which we are currently experiencing right now, terrorism, significant accidents, and also stressors that may result in trauma, including significant medical illness and hospitalizations, poverty and homelessness, which is a significant one, racism, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact of racism on the sort of epigenetic aspect of trauma, historical trauma, family members with substance use disorders that can cause trauma for families. What else are we talking about when we look at the actual experiences? Many of these we talked about. One that we didn't talk about is severe neglect, abandonment and neglect that can occur, and that can really impact particularly the trauma experienced by children. Gang and drug-related violence that we see in the communities. Imprisonment can result in a traumatic experience. Constant oppression, and we mentioned psychological and emotional abuse, and repeated abandonment, as we mentioned before. So, what are the actual 6 types of trauma? This is my next question. Any takers? Acute trauma, what might that be? Anybody? This is a conversation.
Accidents.
Yes, absolutely. An accident could be an acute trauma, a traumatic event that occurs just one time. Complex trauma. Any takers?
I know you said you were going to talk about this, but when I think of complex trauma, I think of cases, something that may start at a very young age, but has sequelae that can go all the way to adulthood.
Absolutely, Sir Shalitha. It is complex trauma usually occurs as a result of repeated trauma experienced by a child or a young person, although it can also occur as a result of experiences as an adult, but it's repeated over and over again. Pastor.
It might even, I don't know where this would fit on the different headings, but trauma that's transgenerational.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll be talking about that transgenerational trauma in the very next one, historical trauma. Thoughts about historical trauma?
Cultural trauma.
Yep, absolutely. Any other thoughts regarding historical trauma? Yes, Dr. Brenneman.
So I'm from a Mennonite tradition, 500 years of fleeing and being imprisoned or pacifist status, or refusal to join the military, all the way up to World War II. So our ancestors were oftentimes in prison, killed by other Christian nations.
Yep.
Because we refused to go to war. So that I know has come down through our families.
Yep.
Just how we think about government, control,
Yep.
be accused of being a heretic, those kind of things.
Precisely. And that's where epigenesis comes in. A lot through the historical trauma.
We have a student here from Rwanda.
Oh, yes.
He's a pastor in Rwanda, and historical trauma there, of course, was the genocide. that took
Absolutely.
place in 1994. And then it also brings to mind the Holocaust.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Who in here can give us a definition of epigenesis? Anyone want to take a shot at it? Mhm.
problems with birth, the Native American tradition
Right.
has a real strong tradition.
Precisely.
It affecting generational DNA, or the structure of the genetic makeup.
Right. You're absolutely correct, Dr. Brenneman. It actually impacts your genetic makeup. It doesn't change your genotype, but it changes your phenotype, which is the expression of the gene. And as a result of oppression, slavery, as you met the Native American community, there has been epigenetic changes as a result of that constant traumatic experience through generations and generations and generations. Absolutely. Sanctuary trauma. Anyone want to guess?
Are we talking about church on Sunday morning?
Actually, it's not too far from that's close. Yep. Sanctuary trauma actually occurs when trauma is of a psychological trauma that occurs when someone experiences more trauma in a place where they're expected to be supportive, such as an organization. The example that is often used, the example of veterans who have gone through wars and wars and wars, and they come into the VA hospital system for support, and they end up being traumatized by the experience of just having to fill out more and more paperwork and not being appreciated for all the service they've done, or coming home from war. But certainly, individuals who, let's say, someone is coming into a church that's very orthodox or very strict in their principles, and they're a little bit different from some of the other folks. They experience trauma being, if they're imposed, they have to remain in that environment when they are not accepted or they're looked down upon, and that's a very difficult experience for them. So that's sanctuary trauma. Sheila.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I've experienced that, just the thought of it. I'm having a little bit of anxiety here. And I'm not going to go into details. I know this is being streamed live and everything. But I experienced that at one of the churches I was at when I chose to divorce.
Yes.
And the pastor took his side, and it could have been something really simple. And it went on for about 8 years. I had to go to court.
Yep.
And the attorney. But I'm going to stop right here, because God worked it out in my favor.
Amen.
He brought me out of that situation, and the result of that, I'm still being blessed. And you really have to be careful how you treat people, because that attorney that was so mean to me dropped dead in the airport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can I just add that Sharon was just also saying that even the example of sanctuary being
Right.
the church, she also gave another example of the sanctuary also being the hospital,
Yes.
where sometimes individuals go into a space
Yep.
wanting to seek care and then also can experience trauma.
Absolutely. Significant issue. Yeah. Healthcare inequities. Vicarious trauma. Anyone to take a right here?
Good morning. So vicarious trauma can be a little like if you are witnessing or supporting somebody who has experienced trauma, and then from listening to their traumatic experiences, you can tell also from the trauma.
Precisely. That level of empathy that can occur. Frequently, years ago, a student and I developed a trauma training program for police officers designed specifically because they experienced a lot of vicarious trauma. And by not dealing with that, it impacted their functioning as police officers. You can imagine that also is true of many EMTs as well. Collective trauma.
So thank you very much. Collective trauma can be psychological trauma and related also to a collective group of people, specific people, like what the professor came to say. Like in Rwanda, it happened during genocide.
Yes.
So one to the specific group of people that have been killed because of their how they are. So I think it's like a collective. It has the roots. It has the roots from the for a long time.
Yes.
Period. So it is collective. Then up to the end killing. Thank you.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Yes, collective trauma is a shared psychological reaction to a traumatic event that affects a group of people. Examples of collective trauma include mass shootings, natural disasters, pandemics, wars, and widespread community violence. So we've experienced a lot of that collective trauma. Yeah. So those are just some different types of trauma. Let's look into the impact of trauma. So, who would like to suggest various types of impact of trauma? What would you expect to be the impact that trauma has? Anyone?
Thinking about medical trauma, when you have experienced unfair treatment, when you haven't been believed, when you are misdiagnosed, when you have surgical or any sort of invasive procedure and there's been a negative outcome, people typically don't believe and they don't go to the doctor when they need to go to the doctor to seek help. And when you think about my experience of not being believed or having a negative outcome, I tell my sister, and my sister who loves me says, oh yeah, I never believed that system would work for us anyway. So then it's not just the impact to me, but it's also the impact to my family system, who may not trust that system.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking about complex trauma, specifically I work with kids, so neglect and trauma that happens to children, leading to anxiety and depression in these children, which leads to poor coping mechanisms, and that can turn into substance abuse and unhealthy relationships and behaviors and practices, which then just kind of trickle and snowball into other issues.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Also, as it relates to children, it can also lead to brain development, impact on brain development. Also, as Sister said about anxiety, depression, the way that you regulate yourself, not being able to do that. So that's very, you can have long-lasting impact.
You guys have provided the lecture. I can sit down. Excellent responses. What other impacts do you?
It can keep one from simply functioning in a normal manner, or keep one from putting themselves in a situation where they think something might happen.
Precise. Avoidance behavior. Yes.
I think oftentimes another coping mechanism is to suppress the emotions that you feel from the trauma you experienced, and when you suppress those things, you then have triggers, and when that trigger is initiated, then that manifests itself in anger, outbursts, treatment of others in ways that they, didn't expect themselves to be capable of treating others. You see a side of themselves comes out that they're not familiar with. Depression.
Absolutely correct. Thank you.
Can I
That
just
trigger.
add-
Oh,
I just
please,
wanna
Lisa.
add, at the most granular level, it impacts one's ability to sleep. And we know the true
Yes.
impact of sleep is rest and restoration for our bodies. And so the impact of that can be long-term.
Absolutely. Yes. Carmen?
I had mentioned earlier about cultural trauma. Personally, I have experienced that ever since I came here in the United States. I'm a member of Lakeshore since 1979. And because I'm from the Philippines, when I talk to people and interact, just talking before they even answer me, they say, where are you from? Right away you were kind of, you don't belong there,
Yeah.
So that's it got in me that, I migrated here legally in this country, and I love America. Every time I go back to the Philippines, as soon as the airplane touched down in the air, we're like, oh, thank you for bringing me back to this country. Anyway, it's this talking in the dialect tongue, there's no respect anymore there, and it goes down to generation, like somebody's from, before they even talk to you, they say, where are you from? It kind of crush your whole being.
Yeah.
So, I'm still experiencing some of that. I lived in Tennessee, in Chattanooga, Tennessee for 25 years. When we first bought the house, right in front of the house, there was a Ku Klux Klan cross on our telephone. They said, get out, you don't belong here. But we stayed. They said, we belong here, So, and because I stayed in Tennessee for 25 years, I picked up the Filipino reading accent, That's why, so I hope you understand my English. Thank you.
Yes. Carmen?
I'm going to just say, if you get the mic, hold it close. The live streaming is having a hard time hearing unless you hold it close. And then we also have about 10 people on live stream right now.
One of the other impacts of trauma is that it affects our ability to be present in our bodies. And
Yes.
so Dr. Shida mentioned how a lot of people have trouble sleeping. It's because throughout the day they're having trouble being present actually in their body and being present in everyday activities. So we often see people autopilot or trying to distract themselves in many different ways. And that's the impact of trauma. It makes it feel unsafe for us to be in our bodies.
Absolutely. Dissociation.
The first thing that came to mind to me was onset phobia. For example, if you were in a bad car accident, you may not ever drive again. So sometimes you wonder why people don't do what you think is normal to do, but you really don't know what they're been through and what brought them to that point. So the onset phobia.
Precisely.
I think of medical trauma. When someone receives a diagnosis of, you have to have open heart surgery tomorrow morning, and how much that plays on the psyche of the patient that's been in our unit. And then after surgery, that recovery time period, change of body image, and that person is not the same, even though they're healed on the outside. It does something to your body, your mind, to think that your heart was stopped, to have surgery. And then the depressive episodes they experience 4 to 6 months after recovery from open heart surgery.
Yep.
It's traumatic.
And as many of you mentioned, each time a similar event occurs, it triggers. So you have that immediate physiological, cognitive response again. which is one of the classic characteristics of the impact of trauma. So we talked about some of the body-brain fight, flight, freeze reactions that you experience with trauma. We talked about some of the memory and perception issues that occur, the often fragmented, difficulty concentrating when you've experienced trauma, even judgment and insight. You perceive things differently, and perhaps to others' eyes, you perceive things incorrectly, but to your eyes, you're perceiving them the way you perceive them. You have challenges weighing the consequences of your behavior as a result of that. And one of the sort of classic examples that are given is that children who have experienced trauma, have been abused, they have this experience of, I'm supposed to be cared for by my caregiver. However, my caregiver is the person who has abused me. So that sort of inconsistency cognitively for that child creates a significant problem in terms of their ability to trust others. We talked a lot about trust today, and that's one of the significant impacts of trauma in terms of trust. And one of the important aspects of the treatment for trauma is regaining that trust. But it even impacts one's belief systems in terms of you can't not only trust, but your self-esteem, who you see as yourself, is impacted by that. Your worldview is impacted in that you feel that, for example, what can I believe? So oftentimes people who have experienced significant trauma have challenges even believing in God and believing that there is a spirituality within the world, because they have not had that experience, particularly children who have been abused for long periods of time. You can also, as we might expect, a fair amount of physical damage can occur as a result of trauma, even just torn blood vessels, and sometimes it can lead to seizures and things of that nature when you experience that physical trauma. There are neurochemical imbalances in the brain. One of the areas of the brain that is oftentimes impacted by trauma is the ability to use serotonin. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that helps you sort of see that the world is okay. So that impact from a neurochemical perspective impacts one's behavior. This is sort of a pretty blatant example of what happens with abuse. Here, that's the healthy brain. And as you can notice here, those are the temporal lobes. And in the temporal lobes, you have reception of sensations, memories, and all that sort of thing. And you can see here the brain of an abused child where basically that blood flow, that activity is nil and void. So that not only do you look at, you can perceive behavioral changes, you can see changes in terms of how people interact with one another, but actually for abused children who sustain their trauma over long periods of time, there actually are neurological changes in the brain that are impacted by that trauma. Here's another, yes?
Can that be reversed? What we were just looking at?
No. One of the reasons why it's challenging to reverse is that at the next level of that, we saw that temporal lobe is sort of a larger area of the brain that you can see activity, blood flow activity. But at the cellular level, there is also damage that occurs. This is an example of a healthy neuron with the axonal and dendritic sort of indications here, the nucleus. Here is a damaged brain from excessive stress, where those healthy connections to other neurons do not exist. So again, an example of persistent sustained trauma and its impact on neurological functioning. And of course, you guys have done a very good job of delineating all of the sort of behavioral changes that occur in terms of the persistent fear response, that they really can't relax. They're always in a state of anxiety and fear, a hyperarousal response. And then, I think it was Shalita who alluded to it, the whole dissociation. You don't see yourself within your body. You dissociate from your person when you're in a very severe sort of traumatic experience. And of course, with all of that occurring, particularly for children, it doesn't go unnoticed that that child is unlikely to be able to function very well in an educational setting. Their ability to learn and to be able to function in a classroom setting, concentration, memory, organization, comprehension is impacted. But also what happens then is you trigger yet another system that gets involved. So it is perceived that the child is not going to be successful in the academic environment, or they create problems in the academic environment, and therefore they get assigned to the court system, and so you get yet another set of spirals in terms of that child's functioning. They end up being in juvie, in those types of settings, and you will see a lot of that in juvenile hall. And what we've described here in terms of the types of experiences we have experienced in terms of trauma is exacerbated tenfold for persons who are unhoused. Okay, so let's talk about what we see with the unhoused. Just from sort of statistical perspectives, this is sort of the history of trauma among homeless adults. Of homeless adults, greater than 27% lived in foster care or group homes or other institutional settings. 25% were physically or sexually abused as children. 21% were homeless as children. As adults, interestingly, but perhaps not so interestingly, based on what we just talked about 23% of unhoused individuals are veterans. 15% of all inmates in prison settings have been homeless at some point in their lives. And approximately 31% have been physically or sexually abused. 46% have been shot or involved in some type of violence. And about 50% have been attacked with a knife or some other sharp object. So that scenario of what happens, what is the history of individuals who have been homeless. And then we have the history of trauma among unhoused youth. Almost all of them have been involved in some type of family conflict. 46% have been physically abused. We see this pattern of abuse throughout. And many of them have been in foster care. 1 in 5 youths who arrived in shelters came directly from a foster care setting. Over 25% have been in foster care in the previous year. And then we sort of look at, well, what may have resulted in that? And many, many years ago, there were a series of studies looking at adverse childhood events within children, the ACEs score. And ACEs score basically identifies if you have had some type of traumatic event or adverse event, and what is the impact of that on your functioning. We know that children with ACEs scores of 4 or greater have significant problems in school and oftentimes are found in homeless communities. What we know that, for example, there's children with ACEs scores of 4 or greater typically have recurrent physical abuse, recurrent emotional abuse, contact sexual abuse, alcohol or drug abuse in the home, incarcerated household member, someone who is chronically depressed, mentally ill, or institutionalized, or suicidal. Mothers are treated violently. They typically have only one parent, and there's emotional or physical neglect. Typically, they have 390% greater risk for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, have 240% greater risk for sexually transmitted infections, twice as likely to smoke, twice as likely to have cancer, twice as likely to have heart disease, 12 times more likely to have had suicide attempts, 7 times more likely to have alcoholism, and 10 times more likely to have been injecting street drugs. So what we're describing here is a scenario of long-term abuse, neglect, and exposure to a lot of challenging situations, which characterizes the history of people who have been homeless as adults and as children. And I won't go into all these statistics, but it is consistent with the pattern that we just talked about. And also, many of the kids who are homeless are LGBTQ, which exacerbates it even further. And they're 7 times more likely to have been a victim of violent crime. So, we are committed as a community of faith and a community of people to address the needs of the homeless, address the needs of those who need food, address the needs of those who need shelter, address the needs of those who are just suffering. And this is our work. This is the work that we need to be doing. This is what the Lord has told us is our mission. And there are plenty opportunities for us to do something about it. So what are some of the treatment interventions that we need to pay attention to? I just throw that out to the clinicians in the room. What do we need to be doing? What are some of the proven effective ways that we can support homeless youth, homeless adults?
One, you have to make treatment accessible. So
Amen.
thinking about, before you even talk about a particular modality, it is what are we doing on a policy level, federal, state, county, city? Because, so then there's policy. And then we're also, I'm a social worker by training, so I always lead with policy first. And then I'm also thinking about health insurance in the United States. So you can have a brick and mortar that people can walk into, but what about coverage? And you know that coverage is not equitable.
Right.
We're also thinking about documentation, so on the clinician level. One of the things that always says when I hear on fire is when I read documentation from other clinicians. So then we're also talking about training around biases. Do we know, are we familiar, are we curious with communities so that we can show up more effectively? And then also, I could probably don't know, but my sister got it.
Yeah, this is here, but trauma-informed care, like really addressing it through the lens that this child has experienced trauma. I worked in child welfare for over 23 years. I retired last year, but what I have seen over time was that there was an over-medicating of the children, saying that they had ADHD, when they had trauma, they had PTSD, and they was responding and acting out through their trauma. And so having trauma-informed care and being able to build resilience in the child, seeing the child as a whole in their whole experience, is an innovation that's well needed.
Rika?
To add to both comments that already made, I was thinking it wasn't effective for particularly unhoused persons. I think we need to think outside the box. Maybe the care needs to come more to them, not telling them to come to us. So there is a mobile things that are going on, the mobile crisis thing going on, but I'm thinking even more basic than that. Providing maybe, you know what that, that's a good idea in here, have a mobile therapy office that will because it's not that sometimes if you're, first off, you're homeless, you're depressed, all the things that's going on that are unhoused and depressed, who says they're going to get up and come to your office? Let alone do they have access to go somewhere virtually to come and see what you do. So perhaps we can talk about that somewhere along the line, but it would be more accessible going to the bush, going to the tents, going to the encampments, versus assuming they're going to go get their medical thing done and come to your office. Just something to think about. What was so cool during the pandemic is that we actually saw that.
Yeah.
At the time, I was working at Kaiser, and I worked in the Mossville building. And Mossville Park became a city
Yeah.
of unhoused people, families. We saw children in the park. And what the city did during the pandemic, which I'm kind of curious why we're not continuing to do that, is that they would send teams into the park to help people.
Yeah.
Food, haircuts, medical care, all kinds of things. So we know that it can be done,
Yes.
but why isn't it continuing to be done?
I think my colleagues have highlighted really well the extent to which our biases can make us have this expectation of capacity that those who are traumatized should have to live up to, when the reality is that if we think about the survival rate and we think about the nervous system being traumatized, we can't possibly have this expectation of how someone accesses us for services. It's almost like we're trying to have them prove to us that they are, that they are worthy of being served.
Yep.
When the reality is that just being a human being, the dignity of treating them as worthy of being served without them having to physical.
Excellent. Excellent. You guys are really speaking to the basic tenets of trauma-informed care. And starting off knowing that trauma is pervasive. Knowing that trauma affects the individual's life and their responses to support services. Knowing that it's critical to emphasize safety for the individuals. Going to them would actually reinforce that you want them to be safe. And most importantly, I think, is the last two, creating an atmosphere of trust. And as was just stated, compassionate collaboration. Absolutely we need to be cognizant that when working with the unhoused, with working with anyone, but particularly for people who are unhoused, who have experienced such significant traumatizing events, experiences, and that we have to approach them with a lot of humility and a lot of sense that we are on your side. We want to work in collaboration with you to identify how you're going to get through this. It's not easy. And it's very challenging for educators and healthcare practitioners and even good church folks to approach things in a humble and collaborative manner and seek answers from the patients and from the clients and not just constantly providing solutions without engaging in what's going to work for you. Again, this is just another representation of that. And I like these 6 principles because it takes also into consideration cultural, historical, and gender issues. Things that we need to be mindful of as we approach folks in providing care and support. One other thing that I think in healthcare system that we need to do a much better job of, and that is respecting and acknowledging the efficacy of an interprofessional approach to care versus a single focus of one discipline treating a patient. It's just logical. If you're dealing with a person with the complex issues, physiological, behavioral, social, that one practitioner is not going to be expert in all those things. But if you have a nurse practitioner or a physician and a behavioral health consultant and a social worker working as a team, you can accomplish so much more than any of that individually. And that's one of my big sort of pushes in the healthcare system, in the training of all my students, that we need to approach our healthcare system in an interprofessional way. It's so much more effective, greater efficacy. Finally, and I think we've already spoken to this, and that is, if we provide housing to the homeless, we need to provide wraparound services within that are easily accessible to them as well. Because a home alone or a house alone is not going to address the trauma that they've experienced. So, with that, we have time for our QA and panel discussion. Pastor?
This is really good. And the person who helps practice a lot of what you're saying in the community is Deborah Israel. Deborah, stand up, please. And come say, Deborah is the community liaison for council member and candidate Nikki Fortunato.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome.
Yeah, I just want to say, I saw Deborah, it's really wonderful to have you all here. I am assigned to this neighborhood and I'm here often, and a lot of the things you're bringing up and you're sharing are some of the things that we're facing on a daily basis, right? That the constituents, business owners here in Grand Lake and other neighborhoods bring to our attention often the need for wraparound services, mobile outreach on the streets. So, yeah, I was thinking about all the things that have been addressed, not on the scale that we needed, but definitely our office is in partnership with Alameda County and bringing together city and county leaders around homelessness, mental health. I just saw something, the governor's office is doing a webinar. I don't remember if it's the week coming or the one after the CARE Act and Proposition 1. And I try to bring in, well, what is happening, and then it's important, right, to follow up and find out how it's being implemented. Is it helping? There's a lot of controversy with some of these things. So it's really informative for me to be here today and hear what you're bringing in, and for the folks who are doing the work the retired folks with all your history. It's really good to have you here and to hear what you're bringing to the conversation. Thank you.
Let's transition to our panel. By the way, I have some copies of the slides. If any of you would like them, let me know.
Thank you, Dr. McLean. Okay, that is fine. If I can have the social workers to come up to the panel, we have a table and chairs for you all. And as we do this transition, you all can just have a seat here. What I would like us to do as we do this transition, Dr. McLean gave us a lot to think about and gave us some additional information. But what you also did was raise the idea that we all are managing some form of trauma. And so what I would like us to do is just center us just for a moment. Once we're all still, I'm going to just take us through what we call in heart math, a heart-focused breathing technique. You all can just sit. You can have your eyes open or closed. If it helps you to place your hand over your chest. And what I would like us to do is to breathe in the area of our heart. Focus your attention around the heart. Breathing in a little slower, a little deeper than usual. You can count in for 5 seconds and count out for 5 seconds. And we'll do this for 1 minute. All right, thank you. The most important thing about centering in this way is it allows us to be more coherent. And there's no better time to be coherent than to hear from these specialists that we have for you. And we are going to go from left to right. And so to my left, we have Ms. Rico Wright Sosa, who is going to be speaking about the unhoused and partially unhoused as it relates to trauma. Next to Ms. Rico, we have Ms. Carmel Ellis, and she's going to be talking to us about the experiences of trauma in the environment. And then we have Ms. Renee Cage, who's going to be talking to us about trauma, youth, children, and violence. And then we have Dr. Aretha Hampton, who's going to be talking to us about trauma and long-term illnesses and neurophysical factors. We're going to give them 5 to 7 minutes to speak and give some information, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rita White. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Oakland, California. I serve different areas in the Bay Area as well. I do have private practice, but I'm here mostly in my with a hat today on as director of the State of Counseling Services at Homelessness Baptist Church. And so we provide this time information referral, consultation on cases and of the sort professionally and clients with presentations and training workshops and all the things. We'll be ready to go back to provide some services as well in the future. But I'm tasked with the opportunity to talk about unhoused adults, mostly is my topic. So as a former medical social worker at Highland Hospital here in Oakland, I worked there for 20.5 years, primarily in the emergency room trauma center. I have a lot of experience working with those who are identified as being unhoused, both adults and youth, actually, but I focus on our adults. And actually, there's also a lot of families. But what I thought I wanted to do a little bit in this space is kind of, so Dr. Alvin did an awesome job in providing some statistics about this, so we can give you all the numbers and do all the data. But what I wanted to do in this space is do a little bit of dispelling some of the myths of the unhoused, because we see them and people have judgment, have passed judgment on who they are, and them not taking advantage of resources that are available. What I want to first say, before I get into this, is really, resources are limited. Just like your people in general who are working, have a great job and all things together, it's hard to find housing with that. So we first want to also identify that there's different definitions of housing, and we want to be careful not to be judgmental. A house to you is probably, most people, when they say it, they speak of a building with doors and windows, but people's tent is their house. People's RVs on the side of the road is their house. And so we want to be cautious of that. People coming and couch surfing at your house is a house. And so we want to be careful that we are not putting on our own ideas of what it looks like. Yes, at the same time, though, we're not happy about seeing people on the sidewalks, the streets, or in the grass and the overpass that you see and things of that nature. It is just very discerning. But I did want to share that piece, that we want to make sure that we are not just assuming. Some of these people some of them are working people. Some of them work at your job, and you'll be surprised. People who you would consider unhoused or partially housed. So be sensitive. They have degrees. They have families. They have a lot more than what we think. It's not just mental health, although mental health is highly, highly one of the commonalities that we find. But would you not have some mental health concerns or issues if you were unhoused? Perhaps, right? There are resources out there, but I want people to be understanding they don't match, the resources that are available don't match the numbers of need. In the wintertime, I'll give you an example. In the wintertime, there's specifically shelter beds that are available. People always say, why can't they just go to the shelter? There's a couple of things. Number one, shelters are not always identified as a safe place to be. A lot of the unhoused get assaulted at the shelters. A lot of them get their only belongings they have that they come with stolen at the shelters. Some of them are trying to avoid their own addictions and then find it still in the shelter. Not all of them, let's be clear. There's some shelters ran very well and very with a lot of good staffing, controls, all the kind of things, but these things do happen. People say, well, why do they sleep all over,
my street, they sleep during the day because it's better to sleep during the day than to sleep at night. They walk at night, if you notice. Or they'll be at your emergency room waiting area. This is why I used to deal with a lot of that, had little shelters in the waiting area at the hospitals. So I just want us to be clear of who we're speaking of, and that they are, they use the resources that they do have available. Sometimes they don't want the resources. People say, well, again, why can't they just go to the shelter? There's so many. They say there's all these things. It's not that easy. They can't just walk in. There's a curfew. They have to get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, 5 in the morning sometimes, and be out for the day and in the night or in the evening. Some of these things are changing with the way that we are sharing the resources. Now, more currently, it appears that we've changing some of that ideas of how we should help them connect to resources. And there are now what we call, I'm trying to get to that actually, I got my little notations, bear with me. There is what we call like some centers that help connect persons to shelter. So they can't just walk up to the shelter, knock on the door, and go in. How many of you know that? You know that? Because a lot of people think, right, that you cannot, that you can just do that. There are organized ways that the county has put in place to connect people to services and to shelters, whether it be individual, families, couples. Some of them are limited based on, what other factors they have as well, including if they have pets, if they're a couple but they're not married, they can't go together, and so people choose to stay together in situations that are seemingly uncomfortable for us, unhoused, shelter, tents, and things of that nature. I'm gonna pass it to the next speaker.
Everyone, it's good to be with you all. I'm Carmel Ellison. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a certified Enneagram therapist, so it's one of the leading trauma treatments in our field. And I am also a certified coach. While I have worked with men, I primarily work with Black and brown women. My work is really centered on helping Black and brown women unburden their bodies so that they can connect more to their essence. And I call that essence that part of us that is not armored. And through trauma, we know that we have learned how to armor ourselves in many different ways in our society. And I've worn different hats in different settings, level 1 trauma centers, crisis units, academia, corporate, you name it. And so this is something that's really big for me. You can probably tell through my body, there's so much passion that comes out in actually wanting to humanize our experiences, and that trauma is a part of it, but it doesn't have to be our legacy. And so when I think about trauma in the environment, and I think my voice can echo. When I think about trauma in the environment, I think about also the experiences that happen vicariously in our bodies, not just the experiences that we encounter communally. I think about how much has changed prior to the pandemic and even after the pandemic. These are also experiences that are rooted in the environment and that contribute to vicarious trauma. I also think about how 2024 has been a year of a lot of stirrings for us. Socio-political, environmental, you name it. There have been wars that we have been aware of, whether we have direct access to it or not. There are things that we're noticing through news spreads. We think about Project 2025, and a collective of us can feel in our bodies what that means to our rights. We've had changes in terms of healthcare and laws, and not only are we affected by it, but we also are affected by the basis of knowing other people who will continue to be harmed and impacted. And so when I think about environmental trauma and experiences of it, there can be a mourning and a sense of loss. Even the experiences of violence that we hear of or we have direct access to because we know of clients who have been impacted, we know our friends who have been impacted, or we go to gatherings and, we have a desire to have a good time and something happens that completely changes the trajectory of the experiences. These are all trauma experiences in our environment that also have a direct impact to our bodies, whether we're in proximity to it or we happen to hear of it. There's so much intelligence in our bodies that we don't have to be at a particular place for our bodies to be impacted by circumstances. And so not only is there a mourning of loss of trust in our ability to be present somewhere and to trust that what we intend to see happen will happen, there can also be the sense of disempowerment that we feel. Sometimes the impact that happens in our environment, we want to make so many big changes, and yet we tend to feel impacted and we tend to feel helpless at the micro screams of changes that would have to happen in order for us to be able to do our work here on the ground. And so when you talk about the unhoused individuals, I know collectively on our bodies and the environment, that's also an experience of trauma to walk past another human being and to know that they don't have their basic needs. And to know that we want to do something about it, but then we walk to the next block and we see 10 more people. And that's the impact on our bodies. And that's the impact on our bodies. The other experience that I think of is the increasing amount of isolation that happens. So if we think about trauma in the environment, if we're losing connection to trust, if we're feeling disempowered, then chances are we're going to want to numb and we're going to want to isolate. And when that happens, we don't get community care. And without community care, we don't get the type of justice that we're truly looking for in our environments. And so that is the impact of being in the environment and experiencing trauma as human beings, whether we're experiencing it directly in impact or vicariously. So much has changed and so much is continuing to change. And what we're living through right now, someone else might later talk about it and consider it historical trauma years from now. So thank you for allowing me to be here, and thank you to my colleagues for the wisdom that they share. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Renee Cage. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, also a life coach, trainer, author, and speaker. And I come to talk to you about trauma in children and violence, also that manifests through trauma. As I had shared earlier, I worked for Alameda County for over 23 years in child welfare, and I worked through the gamut of it as far as what they would consider long-term foster care with children who were not reunified with their parents, to also was the program manager the last 8 years of my tenure there in adoptions and legal guardianship. I was also over the housing contracts, and we talked about housing, and that is really what a lot of our foster youth are unhoused, because the contract only gave like 82 beds, and we have like over 500 youth, transitional age youth. So that is a lot of youth that are unhoused. And one of the things that we saw, as I shared earlier, is the misdiagnosis and the mislabeling of children that experience trauma. Often they were diagnosed as having ADHD, whereas they were just really acting out through their trauma. They have a huge sense of mistrust, often not able to speak to what they're experiencing. Then it comes out to what may be called violent or aggression or disobedient, or they get also conduct disorder, and so then they go to another system, right? And so we see a lot of the youth go to the juvenile hall. Also, what I saw and experienced is that the commercially exploited, sexually exploited youth, they run away from their foster homes because sometimes there's some mistreatment in foster homes, right? and then they are out on the streets, and then as a means of survival, they are perpetrated on and exploited and are in that lifestyle. And so one of the things that we talked about earlier is the trauma-informed care. And looking at our systems, I know that many years ago they changed the laws around to criminalize our youth and to then deal with them in a different approach where they get the type of wraparound services and support that can help them, heal the trauma, get mental health support. But it's also their, the things that they really need is sometimes housing, right? Is their needs of needing to eat. Their basic needs aren't being met. And so you see this manifesting into drug abuse, sometimes criminal activity. And as a clinician, I work with, as my colleague, Black and brown women as well, and many of them have their own childhood trauma. And it shows up in different ways where they're hyper independent, right? Or also children, I want to mention that they become parentified, where they don't trust others and they want to, maybe they're part of a sibling group, and so they feel like they have to take care of their younger siblings and they have to, survive and take care of themselves. And so they then, not trust the adults that are in their lives or trust the social workers or everyone telling them what they need and should do. So it manifests into anxiety, depression, not being able to regulate themselves, so, outbursts in schools, not being able to concentrate. If you are moving from home to home, how can you focus in school? And so we see a extreme disruption in their, academic success. So with trauma in children, if it's not mitigated, it does manifest into adulthood. And then, we see this often with our transitional age youth. So trauma can be a lifelong struggle for people. And I'm appreciative now that we're talking about it and having an awareness that we can support youth now and also adults around trauma. I think, again, one of the interventions is the trauma-informed care, having compassion, seeing the person as a whole, seeing them as someone that is worthy of support and not someone to look down on, or you're a problem child or something's wrong with you. So trauma is something that impacts us all. Even if you yourself haven't experienced trauma, as you said, our community, there's generational trauma, having experienced friends, community trauma, violence. So youth are seeing a lot and they're experiencing a lot. And so just to have compassion for that youth and not just label them as a problem child, I think is one of the biggest things that we can do for our youth. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Aretha Hampton, Dr. Aretha Hampton. I just got my PhD, so yes, I'm going to say doctor. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a private practice. I retired from Kaiser in 2022 after 20 years, and I'm also a professor at Dominican University. I am a self-proclaimed brain nerd. So when I saw Dr. Shalitha send out the topics for discussion, I was like, oh, neural and physical health, the impact of trauma on our bodies and our brain. Trauma is a big word, and I want to remind us that there are the big traumas, and then there are these small, innocuous traumas. And no one can decide what is a trauma for you except for your brain, right? It is how you respond to a situation. And Carmel, you talked about like walking past someone who is on the sidewalk, right? For some people, they may say, well, that's not a trauma. but it is because it is the meaning that you, the individual, are making of that experience. And then walking around the corner and then seeing 10 more people. And the beliefs and the values, or the disruptions to the beliefs and the values that come up for you. So when I think about trauma on our physical, our mental, our spiritual health, we're talking about an impact on the cellular level. So Dr. McLean has stated that epigenetics, when we experience something, it is changing our mRNA, which is the messenger cell that delivers information to our organs. When we have repeated exposure, abuse, neglect, and a lot of times we talk about abuse, but I want us to know that neglect is one of the top traumas that children and young adults experience. When we talk about the unhoused, or what happens before you become unhoused, when we have these repeated exposures on a cellular level, we're talking about an increase in cortisol to the body. We're talking about people walking around with inflammation in their body. And inflammation increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes. As a matter of fact, African Americans, Latinx people, and South Asian people are at higher risk for developing diabetes. When we think about the exposure, going to the grocery store, sometimes we take that for granted. For someone who is not able to buy food consistently, you want to think about the beliefs and the values of not, if I can't buy food for my children, for my family, I'm not good enough. So there is the cognitive belief that has an impact on our body, which means on our cells. Now, you can take that example of a single person. Trauma impacts the ovum and the sperm. So before a person is even conceived, their mother or their father has had their mRNA changed. Therefore, there is a trauma marker. And that person who is then conceived, say with another person who has a trauma marker as well, then that person is born with their mRNA already altered. If they meet another person and conceive, who also has a trauma marker, their offspring already comes into the world predisposed. We're thinking about what happens for generations of people who experience a collective trauma. So indigenous people. I'm thinking about people who were at the border, pregnant women who were crossing the border, pregnant women before even they got to the border. I'm thinking about Japanese families who were in internment camps. I'm thinking about enslaved people. When you come into the world predisposed to diabetes, cardiovascular disease, mental health conditions, and then something happens to your body and your spirit when you are a child and not having your basic needs met. And a basic need isn't just food and housing, it's also safety and security, which is really the foundation of a basic need. So then we're talking about children who are in heightened situations where their sense of safety is threatened. So then when we think about health conditions, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, maternal deaths, it's almost, sometimes it can feel daunting that, oh my gosh, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Actually, there's a whole lot that we can do. And why? Okay. I think of myself as a brain nerd is because the brain is malleable. Our relationships are malleable. That means that we can change. We can't reverse things to 100%, but through connection, through voting, through actually reading who you're voting for, donating, participating, self-education, we can make a difference. And sometimes it's just with one person at a time. And so that means that we have to take care of ourselves, not to traumatize ourselves by setting ourselves up for failure, trying to do too much. One kernel seed at a time.
All right. Thank you. You all preempted me in asking for a round of applause for our distinguished panel, but now you all have the opportunity to ask these very experienced, knowledgeable social workers who have committed their time today a question or two. Any questions? They've given you a lot to consider. They have a lot of experience here in the room. Any questions?
My name is Chaplain Tess. I'm a community chaplain of Alameda County on a volunteer basis. I thank you for your expertise and your exposure, your experiences. Oh my, that's quite a treasure that we have here in Oakland. All of this that we discuss, we need funds, right? We need funds to move this. Do you know Oakland have a fund? Where I'm a part of World Vision participant when they funded this. Only Oakland. Are you aware of that? World Vision funded Oakland. I'm one of the participants when they landed it. We had it in Icon Church in Webster and 23rd. And we have all kinds of people that are involved there. But where is the money? Where is the fund? I don't know. World Vision supports other country. They don't support America, But the Office of World Vision is in America. But this is the first time the World Vision supported America project. And the only first one is Oakland. So I would like to challenge you, find out where did the money go? Where is World Vision funding for, specifically, they funded it for the Ann House of Oakland.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank the very extinguished panel for all the wonderful information you provided to us this morning. My question is for each one of you, if you could just make a recommendation to us as participants, one thing that we can walk out of this meeting today and do to start an impact. Each one from your different perspectives, what is one thing that we as participants today can do?
Thank you, Dr. McLean. I was going to ask that same thing. You all have given us so much information, and if nothing else, a call to action is extremely important to what we do. We can't really come into this space and learn and listen and hear, be impacted in our mind, in our body and spirit, without also having a task for us to do.
Well, something that is top of mind is that elections is right around the corner on the 4th It's on Tuesday. And so if we think about all of our efforts here and we think about grander what we want to see in the world, we always start off with our local, our state and presidential elections. That would be the biggest thing, to vote and to find community. If you are confused or have questions about any particular bill, any particular decision that you would like to make, I would recommend finding safe community, even in the next few days, if you want recommendations from us that you can find so that you can feel empowered to vote. And that is a starting point.
I would say one thing to do is to find a community organization or a church or some type of grassroots initiative to get involved in. Sometimes it takes, donating money, and sometimes it's your time. And I think also just having conversations with your family and friends is important, and to continue to keep this conversation going.
Be mindful of where you spend your dollar. Money is power. It is a tool. And there's the phrase that money is the root of all evil. I like to think of it as that money is the root of all good, because you can do so much with it. It's not the tool, but how you use it. And in our socio-political climate, what we know, hearkening back to the civil rights movement, and even before it was labeled the civil rights movement, people were really careful about using their money as leverage. So if you want to hold corporations accountable, you think about where you spend your dollar.
Thank you, fellow panelists, because I was having a moment trying to think what one thing you can do whether you had money or didn't have money, right? We all know we use our money wisely. We vote on Tuesday. We do all the things that we said. But the other thing is I think I would encourage us to really educate yourself and not fall into the idea, understand who the people are. Understand, be sensitive and empathetic, because to be quite frank, some of us are really not that far. If the wrong thing happens in our family, we could very well be some of those persons out there. There are people with PhDs on the street. There are people that had great jobs and careers on the street. And all the trauma that we talked about, that Dr. Alvin outlined and we spoke about here, some of us have experienced some of those same things. It's just by the grace of God that we're sitting in the spaces and with the titles that we have here right now. So I guess I would encourage us, the first one thing you can do is continue to have empathy. Remember that could have very well been you, and that we all together, with our vote, with our ways we spend money, and being mindful of all the things and education, can make a difference, even if it's within just our little small community. Thank you.
I just wanted to share two resources that are really important, and that sometimes Black and brown men and women may not know are out there. One is called the Loveland Foundation. They give scholarships and vouchers for therapy services for Black girls and Black women. The other organization is 100 Black Men, and they provide scholarships for both Black women and men, and also Black boys. And so I greatly encourage anyone who is considering use of therapy and they're not quite sure if they have the funds. I don't want you to worry about whether or not you're taking from someone else who may not have the resources. If you're in need and you need support, I would recommend that you reach out to those organizations.
And there's many more.
There's many more, yeah.
I'm blanking on one, but I can pull up my website. There is a therapy fund for LGBTQ+. There is a fund for Latinx people, and there is the Boris Henson Foundation that also provides therapy funds as well. Money is on my mind these days. You can donate to these funds. So when we talk about how do we help our brother and our sister, is when we know that there are organizations that will provide support to people, we can channel our funds to those organizations.
There's another organization called Our Joy Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. They provide also mental health support. They also have a lot of circles, different healing circles. I actually facilitate one of them on Tuesdays called Fly Girl Therapy. It means finding love in yourself. And so they also have other groups of circles as well that's free. They provide food. They also incentivize it and give you a $100 gift card if you come to 10 sessions or more. So that's another resource.
There's resources. Can you hear that? There's resources. There are things. People just need to know where they are. There's others. That Bend is another one that you can look up. Just, I would say, afterwards, touch bases with us. We can definitely share what we know about. The other thing that people don't realize is that with their own, if you do have medical insurance, including Medi-Cal, you can get, and you encourage your clients to get, mental health services through your insurance. All insurances have been charged to provide the option of using mental health services. Some are more limited than others, depending on your plan, but particularly for those who are of lower income and or mid-income that are able to qualify for Medi-Cal, you call Access, you do an assessment, and you can also get connected. The issue is sometimes about who's on the panel. So you can't ask for what you want. If you want a green-eyed, purple-haired, blue person, just ask for that, and they will try to find it for you. All right. So there's things out there. Just know that there's help available.
That is awesome. I'm just going to build on what you all have shared. And I think, Ms. Rika, you touched on this. One of the things I think that you all can take away is, and Dr. McLean talked about this, is trauma-informed care. We've been talking about it, right? We've been mentioning it. But I would charge you all to go and know and understand what trauma-informed care means, the actions, the words, the utilization of it. Because we don't know from which some persons are coming to us, right? And so we need to be cognizant of how they are arriving to us. I understand you had a question or comment?
Good morning. My name's Sister Roxanne. It's my church home. I wanted to ask some questions because from the age of 5, I was in abusive. I'm Sister Roxanne. It's my church home, and I'm glad that I got the flyer to come about trauma. Well, I've been through since I was 3 to 5 years old, all the way up to 17. I was in foster care, group homes, Snedeker College. You know, that was years back. When infants, we had infant babies, newborn babies when I was there too. My release back before I turned 18 was back home, and I didn't understand that. And they didn't give our age at the time a voice to speak up for ourselves. And I think that's a lot of trauma that was put on me and still on me. But by the grace of God, I'm still going to physical therapy, psychiatrists, prayers with God. I had went to my therapist 4 years ago and was telling her about some situations, and my God, her words I just couldn't believe. Oh, I don't believe you, and that just threw me off. So I actually didn't know who to talk to about the way she said it, but then I finally talked to one of the other workers there. So, you know, and a lot of older up my age group now is still going through a lot. And I think that's why a lot of me shut down like a lot of other people and don't want to talk really to people because of how people might react or think or something. So I just wanted to share. When you say, okay, Medicare will pay for this and that, which it does, but when they send you to a therapist and you talking to them and then they telling you something like what was told to me, how do you report that? Who do you report that to?
It's an excellent question.
I'm sorry you had that experience. That was wrong on so many levels. So there is the reporting to the therapist supervisor. If it's a private practice, you can make a complaint to the Better Business Bureau, and you can report them to the Board of Behavioral Sciences. So there's like different avenues in which you can raise your voice. One of the things that I am hoping and praying that not only clinicians, but also just a provider, period, doesn't matter what you do, but providing services to people, is that we stop saying or asking what's wrong with you and asking what has happened. What are you going through? Because when people are believed, when they are heard, that can go so far. Because a lot of times people will say it wasn't the trauma itself, but ma'am, in your experience of someone saying, I don't believe you, minimizing your voice, dismissing you, that is just as harmful. So report to the supervisor, report to Better Business Bureau, and report to the Board of Behavioral Sciences.
Also, and yes, please forgive that therapist. She knew not or he knew not what they did. Know that you also can say, if you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to stay with that therapist. You can also seek another referral another referral. You're not, and I know sometimes systems make it appear that you must take who they gave you. But you have a right, and you are a consumer of whatever insurance you have, whatever payer source, whether it was a foundation that was spoken about here or whatever the payer source is, you are a consumer and you are to be respected, held with dignity, and if you feel uncomfortable, as anyone in this room and beyond, that you have a right to stop and ask for a new provider because you are worthy of that. And that should be a basic need and basic right that you get services that take care of you. Okay?
Also, as a woman of color, I have a directory it's called Therapy for Black Girls. And on that directory, you can find someone that meets your needs. It has a filter where you can talk about what the issue or thing that you want to deal with. But that is a great resource if you're looking for a Black or brown therapist. Therapy for Black Girls.
I just want to add one more thing to that. A lot of therapists provide actually free consultation calls so that you can get a sense of them and to see if they would be a good fit in honoring your needs. And a lot of clients, when they're seeking out a therapist, they feel like they have to go through the interview process in order to be made worthy to be helped. But I want you to know that 20-minute consult call is for you to affirm your right to determine if that therapist is the person to support you. So I want you to ask them questions. I want you to also determine how they view human beings and even the social causes that are important to them. As you can imagine, we're not blank wall of therapists on this stand. And so I want you to have a sense of who you're interacting with and whether or not they uphold your human dignity and your right to also be an expert in your own experiences. We're collaborating. We're not doing something simply for you, that you are also a healer in your own body. And we want to honor that.
So As you've noticed, the last few nights that it has rained. So winter is upon us. What you can do is donate to shelters, donate to food banks, adopt a classroom of littles. Children will need food. They're already coming to school hungry. They will come to school even more hungry. If you are cold at night, your body, your brain is directing its energy to keeping you warm. That means that you're using more energy. Children tend to be really hungry in the morning. When they don't have food, they express their hunger outwardly. Sometimes with our girls, and this is just a neurobiological difference, girls tend to internalize their feelings. So you may see it or you may not. So we want to be able to do some like really practical things to support our kids. Donating blankets to if you just adopt a classroom and you give them a gift a month or every other month, right? The holidays are coming. People put a lot of money into gifts and all kinds of stuff. That teacher is spending their own money. Donate the basics, the notebooks, the cute pencils, a few backpacks, socks. Oh my gosh, it's cold. I don't know about y'all, but my feet get super cold. Donating socks and the fuzzies. These are in the dollar store, while they still exist. We can do really affordable, practical things to help people on a very basic level.
Year round. In this space, we have been blessed to hear from Dr. McLean, to hear from these experts on this panel. For those of you who are listening to us virtually, we will have the opportunity to have all of the panelists' information connected to the YouTube link. For those who are here in this space, their information will be available outside. And if you have not had already the opportunity to scan the QR code, we want to hear from you. Can I get another round of applause for Ms. Rika White, for Ms. Carmel Ellis, Ms. Renee Cage, and Dr. Aretha Hampton. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Perhaps we can also have a round of applause for Dr. Shalitha Campbell. She got together an all-star panel, and I want to thank you. And one of the things that's important about this panel, we heard all their professional skill sets, and that is part of what we are trying to underscore through these town halls. Oakland has all of the infrastructure, subject matter experts and professionals to solve many of the challenges in Oakland. Particularly, we talk about the unhoused. I said earlier that what's going on in Oakland is not just Oakland. It's frankly every urban center I've been in over the years. But we're hoping that what we're doing is to create a model, a representation model that can be adapted across the country. We can solve this. And we also want to uncover what other motivations may be. If we have this kind of infrastructure that can help solve the issue, then obviously we can solve the issue. It's a matter of putting the resources in the hands of the people who can help us resolve all of these particular challenges in particular. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to shift and process what you all are talking about, and then me going back to some kind of, my thing, my church talk and theology talk, but I'm really processing what I've heard, and I would like to hear it again. And again, it was really helpful. Before we close, I have two people that I need to acknowledge, and I want them to just very briefly speak, because we have to try to honor time. And there are a couple of things my dad used to say. It was a whole lot of things he said, but one thing he said, it was was like this movie, The River Runs Through It. You ever seen that movie? My father said to me, never be late for church, never be late for work. And there was a third one. I can't remember what it was. But it wasn't never be late for school. And so I brought that to his attention. Well, you didn't say that. But that being said, I'm very interested in time. I would like Dr. Brenneman just to come and greet us. He is the president, as I said, of Berkeley School of Theology. He has a lot on his calendar, but each time we do a town hall, he tries to be present. And so, Dr. Brenneman, I'll give you a moment. I know you like to, not to be off the cuff, but you know, we just laid it out for you. All you have to do is say amen, and 20 people will come and say, what must I do to be saved? And then following Dr. Brenneman, the host pastor again, Dr. Jim Hopkins will come and speak, and then I'll just say a final word. Dr. Brenneman, would you please come?
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I was reminded of Resmond Monicum's book. What was it titled? My Grandmother's Hands. And it's on racialized trauma and the need for healing. And so I wanted, as one way of wrapping this up, to be reminded of our own mothers who have carried this burden, this trauma so often for all of us. Particularly our mother, in this case, Representative Barbara Lee, this is her last in December. She is leaving her representation of us in the U.S. Congress. She is the person she sits on our board, and she is the person who, in essence, gave us the name for our Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. It's out of her work that she wants to establish the first Commission on Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation at the U.S. Congress. So may her work continue. So in that spirit, remembering the mothers who've gone before us, and the latest book by Resmond Monicum is called The Quaking of America. And it's on an embodied guide to navigating our nation's upheaval and racial reckoning. And certainly we're in that moment. And I actually can think of no better time because to be sitting in this room on this day as we're about to go into an election that holds so much potential, both liberation potentially with a mother of the nation, a new mother of our nation, if that's to be, and if not, how will we work through this as well? So thank you. It has meant a lot for me and for the school, and God bless you all in your work.
Thanks again, panel. Doctor, I want to just do a brief introduction of Pastor Lacey, one of my colleagues in the ministry in Oakland, pastor of St. Andrew's Baptist Church, and on the Mayor's Interfaith Advisory Committee. Pastor Lacey, come just a quick, you sent me while we were talking a really good quote. Come. And I think it very much fits what I've been hearing this morning.
I better look it up again because I kind of forgot what I put. Greetings, everybody.
Let me see if I got it.
If you pull it up quicker than I can. Thank God for all of you that are here. I understand that our attempt for change is a universal effort. Yeah, so I'll read Curtis Robinson's quote, another one of our counterparts. And thank you so much for what I did here. I was glad to be here. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And I was actually responding, Pastor Jim, with where do we go from here? Chaos. or community. I'm just glad to be a part, and as these meetings happen, I will be in attendance. Nice to meet you too.
Thank you so much. As we get ready to close this out, it's near, if not noon. And once again, we can't leave without thanking Dr. McLean for an incredible keynote. It's exceptional. This has been a wonderful privilege to be here today. We anticipated this kind of gathering. We worked really hard to do the best that we could with all of your help to make this a meaningful opportunity and privilege for us to address these issues. Please, if you don't have some of these cards, I'll call them, please grab them. It's important that you hand them to someone. The work of the Center at Berkeley School of Theology is a significant campaign to, first of all, we have 4 A's. Everybody likes to make A's, and so we'll give them to you. Number 1, our first A is alignment. We are aligned with the mission and vision statement of Berkeley School of Theology. And if there's anything that we cannot handle ourselves, then we find partnerships. For example, what you're doing clearly helps us to do things that we cannot do. The second one is awareness. I really wanted to use Barbara Lee's woke, but that ain't no A. And so we decided to say awareness. You are raising awareness now about a topic that, frankly, really gets under my skin, about my personality, my convictions, when I see people who are outside of a safety net. That really, really bothers me. I saw a lot of poverty when I was growing up, but I wasn't aware of it because everybody around me was poor. And so I didn't understand the condition that I was personally in until I started going into broader circles. But awareness. And then we also are looking at our ability to have agency. Can we be a catalyst for types of change that we believe will not only benefit any particular group, but if you can help people who are estranged from communities of any sort, then obviously we help everyone else. And I feel that that is very, very important here today. I was listening to the brave sister speaking of her challenges that she's had with healthcare providers. And I leaned over to Dr. Carmen and said, you know, it rubs me because that could be me. I mean, like today, it could be anyone in here, particularly those of us who understand what it means to live in a socio marginalized way. And so we want to provide agency, and lastly, access. At the institution, we want to increase funding, resources for people to get formal education, whether it's a certificate, whether it's a master's degree. Many of you all could be very helpful in respect to being close to us. You have skill sets. There may be ways you can help us with our certificate programs, or you may want to get another, I don't know if you want to get another degree, but we'd like for you to consider it. But you could also help us maybe in adjunct ways. We would like to see as many of you as possible to be a part of what I believe, frankly, to be one of the leading theological institutions in the country. Well, I don't want to be that humble in saying something that I'm kind of misleading you. I know it's one of the best schools in the country. I'll just put it like that. It really is. We have a tremendous faculty. We have a team that works closely together to provide. But so that access to resources, scholarships, enlisting people who can help us. And I close with a story I heard one of you say that was similar. I think someone said the PhDs on the street. I think that was you. We're talking about the PhDs on the street. I pastored what we call a flagship in our tradition in the nation's capital. And at one time at 3rd and K in Northwest, you could literally walk right out of Mount Carmel's doors and look right at the the dome of the Capitol building. It's really picturesque, and I have pictures of that. But another form of trauma is gentrification. And people are displaced by gentrification, which I call domestic terrorism, periodly, to uproot people from their homes. But in those days, we could literally do that, and now there are a lot of buildings around. But still, the front of the church, on what we call the plaza, is this beautiful glass that you literally can walk up and look into the sanctuary. I always wondered how we got away with that, because the sanctuary at night no one was around it, and this glass, and no one ever got angry and broke any of that glass. But at night, you could look into the sanctuary like here, and you could see how pretty it was. It was just a beautiful sanctuary. And there was a crucifixion in the middle, and so I have pictures of that. I used to come over and take pictures at night. But there were also unhoused people who slept on that plaza. And in the winter times, they would get as close to the sanctuary. And I used to think, wow, look how close people are to the sanctuary, but they don't feel comfortable about coming in. They sleep there, but some kind of social stratification, et cetera, they don't feel comfortable coming in. Oh, and by the way, there were people on the inside that didn't care if they came in. In fact, there were people who would say to me, Dr. Evans, are you aware that people sleeping out here on the plaza, that could be ramifications for us, insurance and all these things? And I was like, wow. So we used to go back and forth about that. But there was this one fellow, and I can't remember his name, who slept out there almost every night. He was neat, very neat, always neat. Never had to tell him in the morning to clean up behind himself at all. And that was, by the way, I said to the people, I said, listen, so that some of the officers of the church who are constantly telling me that you can't sleep here, I want you to help me make sure you can sleep here. Make sure you clean up after yourselves every day. Which, I built a relationship, and so they were like, yeah, Doc, we got you. Not to mention them being there basically helped us not have somebody break the glass. But some folk don't think like that, do they? Well, I got to know this one guy really well over the years, months perhaps, maybe a year or two. And I noticed he had this uniqueness about him. He was always kind. He did have emotional swings, I will admit that. But he was just a really kind fellow. And so finally I asked him to tell me your story. I learned don't do that until they trust you, because a lot of people who are unhoused that I know have real trust issues to see if you're trying to angle on them about something because of the other traumatic experiences that they've already had. But finally, I asked him to tell me his story. You want me to tell you what this guy told me? And I was not surprised. First of all, he was a graduate 3 times from Howard University. 3 times. Number 1, he had an undergraduate degree in finance. Then he had an MBA and then a master's degree in finance. And he worked for, some people don't know this, but a lot of Wall Street in New York now, which I'm not for this, by the way, but it's happening. Wall Street is moving to the District of Columbia, all up and down K Street, where it used to be for lobbyists. It's now a lot of Wall Street speculation and so forth, which I think that the capital empire should be separate from government, but that's not true anymore. Anyway, he worked for one of those people. He never had to leave the district, and he was a proud 3rd-generation Washingtonian. Have you ever heard that term? Boy, they'll tell you in a minute, they're a Washingtonian. And I learned what that meant later. I didn't understand it at first, and I'll tell you offline if you really want to know. But so I asked him, I said, how did you, tell me your story. He said, Doc, I know what you want to know. You want to know, with all of that, how I ended up here. I said, well, yeah, I do want to know. And he said he felt he could not please his mother. And this was the only thing he was not able to master. Because he could master books. But he didn't know how to manage his relationships. And because of that, he told me he lost it. And his mother died. To complicate it, he could not go back and get her approval. And I didn't know how to help him. I didn't know how to help him. I will tell you later that Mount Carmel Church, to the credit, still has licensed psychologists in the building. From those experiences, I went and got a psychologist to get in the building. They have psychologists on campus. That's why I know we can get them all over Oakland with your help. So this stuff is personal to me. It's not just some kind of theoretical thing. I know that it can be done, but we have to have people who know how to do it. And Oakland is going to be fine. It's one of the prettiest towns I've ever been in. The architecture and how it's laid out is so pretty. But you can't get it back unless we say, enough is enough. And with the help of people like Dr. Hopkins, who has hosted us here today, and those of you with all your expertise, I'm praying that we get the attention of people who will accept that the expertise is here. Put the resources in the hands of the people who can resolve the issues. And with that, I'm not going to ask y'all if all minds are clear, because they ain't never going to happen. All minds are clear. But there is an election, and I assume, has everybody voted that has eligibility to vote? Okay, good. Because it's going to take all those votes. And the irony is, it took $1.7 billion. Do you know Vice President Harris, by the time tomorrow, will have raised $1.7 billion. $1.7 billion in what, 3 or 4 months? To beat a felon, a rapist, God Almighty, a rapist, a felon, a degenerate in an election. You take that home and pray about it. But we have to pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time. We thank you for the people who have gathered. We thank you for the expertise. I personally feel better. I ask you to make all of us feel better, but not too much better, because we haven't done all we can do. So make me a little uncomfortable. I like to get 7 hours of sleep, but if you wake me up, it's okay if things like this are on my mind, to make me do what I'm called to do and do to the best of my ability. And I hope that's how everyone else feels. As we descend now and prepare ourselves for the rest of the day, we ask your grace and mercy, and in his name we ask it. Amen. Thank you. And thank our online viewers.